Well, the debate on the regulation of the internet is back, and this time it is with respect to fake news. The Bombay High Court made some significant observations on fake news today. Hearing a clutch of petitions challenging the 2023 amendment to the IT rules that give more power to the central government to identify fake news about itself, the court asked the centre how can it be the arbiter of fake and false news. It also posed some tough questions to the centre over its proposed fact-check unit. The court said that identification of news as fake and false is subjective and that everyone can have a view, and the centre's view cannot be allowed to be the final view. It asked the government why a fact-check unit is needed when in fact the Press Information Bureau already exists and is doing the same job. To this, Solicitor General Tushar Mehta, who was representing the government in the court, responded, calling the Press Information Bureau toothless and that fact-check unit will only check fake facts. The High Court also asked another pertinent question today. Who will fact-check the fact-checker? The Solicitor General claimed that the fact-check unit will not check whether someone's sarcasm was in good taste or not, nor does it have anything to do with politics and views and expression of opinion. So tonight I ask my guests, 1, is there a need to regulate social media? 2, where does freedom of expression start and where does it end? And how do we know what's fake news and what's genuine information floating around on our apps and online platforms? Let me first introduce my guests on the show. I'm joined by Nikhil Pahwa, founder, Medianama and digital rights activist. NS Napinai, advocate and founder, Cyber Sathi joins us. Dr. Kislay Panday, solicitor at the Supreme Court, joins us. And Khushbu Jain, also advocate, joins us this evening. Welcome to all of you. Good evening. Thank you very much for speaking with Mirror Now. First to you, Nikhil Pahwa, this is not a new debate. This has been going on for years now. And interestingly, there has been no solution which has been found to it. In fact, the space of internet is so vast, and the fact that it is not black and white, it is a grey, vast space of internet and online platforms that, it does require a certain kind of regulation in terms of, curtailing fake news like we have been talking about for several years now. But how do we go about it? Now, the government has said that we're going to set up a fact-check unit and we will be the ones who will identify fake news about ourselves. Is that the right way to go about it?
Thanks. I think this is a situation where the government can't be the judge and jury in its own case, in the sense you can't expect them. It's the job of the media, people like you, for example, to actually fact-check the government when there's misinformation that the government releases, for example. Now, what this particular clause does is it allows the government to fact-check the media. And in an environment where we're actually seeing the RTI being curtailed, if you look at the data protection bill, if you look at the fact that government now regularly refuses to release information under RTI, the only person who has access to that information is the government, right? And so our job as media is to expose the inconvenient truth to the government, about the government, for example, and giving the government unfettered powers to actually censor that news and information is a deeply problematic situation from a freedom of expression perspective, but also from a democracy perspective. The government can't decide what is fact and what isn't, especially when it is the media that is reporting this information. And it's not just about, like, if you look at it, even under the First Amendment to the IT rules in 2020, at that point in time, Section 69A was imposed on the media, which allowed the government to censor news websites. many news websites actually went to court and got a stay order on it, which is, in my opinion, what has led to this amendment, which is saying that, okay, we won't censor a news website directly, but we will ensure that social media platforms don't allow that news to be displayed. So I think it's a deeply problematic situation where the government is going to start, uh, preventing distribution of news that might be actually providing information that the government doesn't want exposed.
Okay, Khushbu Jain, this, like Nikhil said, that not the government, but it's the media who should be regulating and checking the content that goes on air, online, and, the kind of information that we are providing. But we also have seen examples in the past where, quote unquote, the freedom of expression has been used in various ways, in which it can also lead to some sort of threat to national security or the social fabric in times where there is a crisis situation, a conflict situation where fake news has floated and it has just added fuel to fire. So does that sort of also lead us to at least exploring the option where the government can be given this authority to curtail fake news and disinformation online?
Absolutely. We have seen that in the past, and I absolutely, in a way, agree with Nikhil here. Only to an extent, if media would have had the role where it would have acted as neutral as it was expected to. But we have seen that we are living in the age of infodemic, where information is spread, misinformation is spread. We are living in the age of bots. More the misinformation, the way we are living in the technology, it's been spread in a manner that it's becoming impossible for normal people to ascertain certain information, whether it's a false news, it's a fake news, misleading information, or it's a truth. That's where I think, and these situations have led to not a normal part of it, of understanding that what my thought process or your thought process or ideology is, but this has led to a situation where law and order situation comes in place. India has a very different fabric as compared to any other country, but other countries have also entered. If I may point out, Singapore has also come up with similar kind of a law where they're going to check, and if something comes up, they have also come up with a hefty penalty. But here I'm saying India is a different fabric, and India has to, with slightest of the things here and there, some misinformation that comes in place, a law and order situation comes in, and that's where I think government has to intervene, has to protect its citizens, has to take care that law and order is maintained. The laws which are there in place are being enforced in a proper manner. I think that's where the whole situation comes in, that we need some authority as government. I understand there should be a due process or accountability and part of it, but we need government to intervene right now, to have maybe a independent unit, something like fact-checking unit, which practically looks into and tell people like you, us, lawyers and journalists, that what exactly is the right information, what exactly is not. And that's what I think it is all talking about, that it will segregate information after ascertaining whether it falls under the ambit of fact-checking unit or not. Once it is there would be a lot of research that will go through. After verifying through open source information available on government website, notices, circulars, documents, e-gazette is where they will come and they will create, okay, this is fit, or this content falls under the category of misinformation. So I think this process comes very transparent and in a manner will add some sanity to the misinformation world that we are living right now. So in a nutshell, I would say yes, but I'm not taking away the aspect of accountability and transparency there as well, or due process there as well. But we need a central authority, or independent authority which is not biased. Or I may not be even wrong in even pointing out that there are other countries or state actors which would also put in a lot of misinformation in your country. We have seen how US has also seen that what kind of influence China is having in spreading misinformation in their country. So we might have other countries, actors who must be acting for their favor and spreading those information, and you and us or certain groups can't fall under that trap and we start believing or acting on it. So in a nutshell, yes, I would not say it's just media.
Absolutely
but
fair point that when it comes to national security, when it comes to fake narratives being peddled by foreign hands online. We need to be extremely careful, and we need the government's intervention in that. But Dr. Kislay Panday, here within domestic territory as well, there have been concerns, whether we talk about, satire, comedy, or any sort of statement that is made. There are times when the government has been accused of, say, misusing the sedition law in the past several years. We've also had, concerns by the Bombay High Court today saying that these are subjective matters. And when we're talking about subjectivity, the part which Khushbu said that, there needs to be a process of transparency and accountability, that also applies to the fact-checking unit which the government wants to take up. The members of that are like you and I. They'll have their subjective views. They'll have their own opinions on various subjects. How do we really go through this process when, after all, at the end of the day, these things are a very personal and subjective matter?
Well, I will begin with the famous quote that be ever so you high, the law is always above you. And the command of law is that no one can be the judge of his own cause. Here, the government is trying to act as informant, complainant, and victim, and as a judge at the same time, which is not permissible in the law. This amendment is also in contravention with Honorable Supreme Court guidelines in the matters of Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, which commands that any law which controls the expression of speech cannot be vague or overbroad. I understand and I welcome the vision of government, but this is not the way to implement this law. If at all it is to be implemented, then the proper course of action would be, okay, you appoint, but you have to appoint any independent body. The charge of that body should be given to any retired Supreme Court judge. Then this will be called a fair implementation of this amendment. Otherwise, this amendment will be called na khata na bahi, jo hum kahe wo sahi.
Okay, fair point. NS Napinai, you're somebody who has been working in the space of, I'll come to you, Nikhil. Let me first bring in Napinai into this discussion. You're somebody, Napinai, who is working in the space of cyber security and protecting digital space. And I'm sure you've seen several cases in the, in your work where you had, there was a choice whether the government's intervention is needed or it can happen without government intervention. Help us understand how this sort of an argument really stands when it comes to actual cases on ground, when it is a threat to individual security online.
So actually it's very nuanced. When you look at it in terms of yes for a fact check or no for a fact check, then you may not really get the real picture. So when you look at fake news per se and the harms it can cause, the Supreme Court itself has time and again repeatedly held that fake news needs to be curbed, social media has to be regulated, and social media has to exercise caution in terms of what it carries on its platforms and how quickly can it take down fake news which can cause serious physical harm, to individuals, to national security, etc. Now, the second point that we are coming to here is with respect to the intermediary guidelines, which were amended in 2023. So you already had a provision which dealt with fake news, which dealt with a restriction on social media platforms from carrying, that they should put up a notice to users that they should not post fake news, etc. The real issue today before the court is not the provision with respect to fake news. No court is saying that fake news should be permitted. The distinction that they are drawing is the latter part of that provision, which was added in 2023, which says that a fact-checking unit can decide on, it's not just about the central government, it's about the business of the central government. And when you look at that particular addition, That's where the constitutionality aspect becomes very weak. So to first say that a fact-checking unit, which is an internal unit of the central government, will decide unto itself in terms of what is or is not right with respect to the business of the central government. So we are not really talking about general fake news. We are not talking about fake news which is harmful to individuals, etc. We are talking about a very precise subset of it. And when you come to that, and you're saying that I will let me decide and let me be the arbiter for that, and that is the part which is incorrect. That's the part which is unsustainable. And I believe that's what all the speakers have been adverting to also. So my take on it is very simple. I would put it in a slightly different way. If the government wanted to set up a fact-checking unit, nobody could have stopped it. But to introduce a law to say that I will set up a fact-checking unit, and whatever the fact-checking unit says is right and you have to therefore implement it, that's where the legality gets hit. So whatever you wanted to do as a government, as a protective measure, preventive measure, by all means, take it within the parameters of law. But then to say that, let me decide everything for myself and then you have to comply with it is not correct. And that's where the real problem starts.
Khushbu Jain, you want to respond to that? One, this, what Napinai said. Also the fact that, the court said that why do you need to set up a fact-checking unit when there already exists the Press Information Bureau, which every day tweets and posts online about fake news. It is your very own fact-checking system which is in place. Why do you need it? To which, in fact, interestingly, the Solicitor General responded saying that it is toothless. Then instead of strengthening that, why are you creating a new one?
Who is this addressed to? Sorry, is it addressed to me?
To Khushbu. To Khushbu Napinai.
Yeah.
Hi. So, yeah,
Khushbu,
in
are
a
you
way,
able to
it's
hear
a
me?
valid... Yeah, in a way, it's a very valid argument, and I absolutely agree with what Napinai was talking about, that when you already have something in place, but one has to also understand, again, it's toothless. I would say that I not completely agree with the way things have been done. A proper procedure has to be done. You can't be arbitrarily bringing in law where, you try to bring in vagueness into it, because what tomorrow will happen is the moment there are vagueness, that brings in that arbitrariness, that brings in the aspect of, a state where powers have been misused. Same we saw in Shreya Singhal that has happened. So I think that's where more clarity has to come in. With respect to toothless, yes, there has to be something which was needed to be done. How is still doubtful with the way they have done it, but that was needed, because even after that, even if PIB is talking about that this is fake news or this is false news, no action could have been taken. They could not talk to the social media that this specifically this news need not be spread on the platform or need not be taken care of, or those kind of things. So that's where I think the requirement was there of a law in place which can be enforced properly. The whole idea maybe or genesis behind it is absolutely correct, but maybe the procedure or some lacuna that has come up maybe looked into it. Again, I'll go back to the law which are there in other countries, and I think those are beautiful laws which we have to look into. And fake news is not something India is fighting. Everybody in the world is fighting. Just an example of Singapore law, again, because it's as recent as 2021, which says that in case of fake news which has been spread, if it has been found it has been done deliberately, there is a hefty penalty. Apart from the penalty, they make sure that there is a correction direction which is being given. I mean, if I have to elaborate, that is something that if, let's say, you or me or anybody who has communicated the falsehood has to also put up a notice stating that the whatever the communication have communicated previously was false, and also at the same time put in where all places it has gone, and that correction has to reach all the places where that false news has gone from your place. Apart from there, it has to be put in online and it has to be published in a Singapore newspaper and one more other publication. That's the second aspect of it. The third that comes is they are giving a stop communication direction. Under this, the state they can give a person who's required has to take steps to ensure that through internet or end user or whatever way the information is no longer available to the end user on the internet. Then also after that also, despite stopping, they're also giving up a measure where there is a targeted correction direction. Now this direction is where internet intermediaries are, whose service has been taken as a means for spreading of that false information or fake information, will be required to communicate that correction notice to all the end users who have access. So they already have a data that maybe 40,000 people have accessed or read that information. Those 40,000 people should also be sent that correction notice that this information was wrong. So I'm saying the countries are going to that level of it, because all of us, you, me, I think all the four panelists would agree that this is a serious issue which need to be tackled. It has nothing to do with anti-government, pro-government and whatnot, but
Yeah,
that's an issue which is
absolutely.
staying and that has to be taken
Yeah,
care of.
no doubts about that, that this is a plague that we are all fighting across the world. But Nikhil Pahwa, as Khushbu Jain suggested, and as she gave the example of the laws in Singapore, is it as easy, and smooth to work them in a country, and in a country as large and diverse as India? Because I remember a few years back, YouTube influencer Akash Banerjee had compared fake news to the son papdi that we all eat during Diwali, and he said that fake news is spread and shared by people on WhatsApp, just like son papdi is during Diwali, blindly shared with each other, passed on from one family to the other without thinking. Jokes apart, the point of the matter is that this is such a diverse, large country. How do you bring in a law where the freedom of expression is sustained, where the threat of national security or individual security is sustained? How do you maintain that balance, really?
So, firstly, I think let's remember that even Singapore has barely used this law. It may have come out a few years ago, but I haven't seen it being implemented. It's extremely difficult to implement a law of this nature. Secondly, the Singapore law itself was severely criticized for being excessive because they actually give any functionary of the government the power to call something fake and censor it. Now, in a democracy where freedom of speech is sacrosanct, and let's not forget the reasonable restrictions are an afterthought. The right to free expression is actually sacrosanct, right? Let's not forget that in this case, even if you look at PIB fact check, right, that the Indian Express has actually fact checked PIB fact check. So you can't rely on the government to be truthful. It is a media's job to hold the government to account. What this amendment does is it gives
But how do
the
you also
government the
rely on
ability
private
to
entities,
censor.
Nikhil, when you have
No, no,
examples of
but let me
individuals
finish
and
my point, please.
organization having their vested interest?
Let me finish my point.
Yeah.
You can't give the government the ability to censor willy-nilly without having checks and balances. Additionally, the government already has the power to censor under Section 69A of the IT Act. So for what do they need this additional fact check unit when they can do it under 69A? Lastly, the IT Act actually doesn't allow the government to set up a fact check unit. This fact check unit, this amendment to the IT rules is by itself illegal. And all the checks and balances which Khushbu Jain mentioned in her initial comment, those do not exist. There is no oversight over the government fact check unit. The media is the oversight on the government today. What you're doing is giving the government the power to censor the distribution of media fact check on the government. So this is actually very, very dangerous for democracy. I think the High Court has asked some very relevant questions and made some compelling observations. We need to be very, very careful about how we proceed here, especially when we're moving towards an election year where fake news is going to be generated by political entities. In fact, if anything, the government should hold political parties to account instead of trying to use this mechanism to regulate the media. This is not looking at regulating social media. This is looking at regulating media by itself.
Hmm. Okay. Okay, Dr. Kislay Panday, then how do we go about this? Nikhil said, of course, we all know that this is an election year. And add to that, we also have the artificial intelligence. We're living in Industry 4.0 era where AI comes in, all sorts of factors emerge in. And this also serve as a catalyst in spreading disinformation online. Then what's the way forward from the legal point of view?
Well, there is absolute clarity on this aspect. You can create a commission, you can create a tribunal, you can create any body which is under the control of any judge or any any impartial person who will monitor and who will provide the proper way of hearing and appeal and all the rules to deal with any allegation of fake news. But as far as giving the all powers to the government alone, it is absolutely not acceptable in law. Of course, I'm in the consonance of the vision of the government that we should control and we should help the government to control the fake news, but not in this way.
So how does the government go about it? In what way? If not this way, then what way? Napina, you want to come in on that?
Just a couple of points I wanted to come in on. The first and foremost is you mentioned about teeth for PIB. So what exactly is the teeth that the government gets if it is under the intermediary guidelines? It's literally the aspect of, that is where the restriction on free speech also comes in actually. Because it's not about 69A. 69A deals with blocking of content. Whereas when you violate the notice requirements under the intermediary guidelines, then you can ask for the content to be taken down. So that's really the teeth that you're talking about between a PIB fact-checking as opposed to the fact-checking under the intermediary guidelines. So the first input I wanted to give therefore is when PIB gives, and that is where you already have due processes, you already had a provision with respect to fake news. That part, the first part of the intermediary guidelines input is not really being contested. It's the second part with respect to the business of the central government being checked through a fact-checking unit. So when you look at the first part, which restricts users from uploading fake news, and two, where you have already a fact-checking unit, which once it highlights it, the due process is that the existing mechanism, be it through a government agency, which is authorized to send such a notice, asking for a takedown, or through a court order. And this is what Shreya Singhal laid down. And these are the two options which are already available to you. The second aspect which I wanted to come in on, you raised a very critical aspect in your last question on the use of artificial intelligence. Interestingly, we always look at a technology as an enabler for crimes. We have to start looking at technology as an enabler for protection also. So from the COVID lockdown period, when there was a lot of fake news going around, AI was actually used and it continues to be used by various platforms. So once, and all these platforms have their trusted fact-checking units, etc., internally. And once some news is found out to be fake, and if it is being perpetuated, AI has already been deployed to either stop it or to flag it. So for instance, if something is already flagged as fake news and you try to forward it, it'll give you a warning saying you're trying to forward something which may not necessarily be true. You may be advised to verify the veracity of it, etc. So several million messages are actually flagged in this manner through use of AI. So we have to look at things, and the ultimate bottom line in terms of law and free speech and fundamental rights is you will introduce restrictions which are reasonable. So it cannot be that you will say that as a government, we are sensible. We know when and how we will use this provision. So you don't have to worry that we'll be excessive, and that's not how law works. Irrespective of who the government is, the law is supposed to be neutral and the law is supposed to be reasonable and fair. And we have to ensure that, and we have to ensure that systems existing are better utilized. Technology is better utilized to protect instead of going into an overreach mode.
Yeah, what's interesting, Napinai, is the fact that concepts and words such as restriction and freedom of expression are so subjective that you really perhaps have to see it only case to case basis, and you can't have a general guideline when it comes to such contentious issues. Nikhil, you wanted to make a point. Please do come in. Also, the fact that how do we go about this? Since we also know that after the advent of social media and the internet, not just people like me, but everybody around me is now a journalist. You can, break any news online. You can share videos and photographs, which go on to become news on TV channels instead of the other way around. So, how do you bring in that filter? Where do you understand that this is the freedom of expression starting and this is where it ends?
Uh, Sorry, I was on mute. I think there's an important role here for counter speech, especially when there's disinformation and misinformation around. The government needs to increase its capacity to actually correct the record and put facts before people. Um, and that and at the scale at which the government has, which is several ministers, several government accounts, not just PIB fact check, the ability to reach out to the media to correct the record. All of this is a very, very powerful, I mean, it's an enormous amount of power that the government has to correct disinformation. So they need to leverage that ability, I think, above all. We've seen it on ground as well. India has had, because of fake news and disinformation, something which Khushbu Jain also mentioned, there's been law and order situations in many parts of the country. They've shut the internet down in all of these places in all those instances. India has had over 100 internet shutdowns per year for many years, and that's the highest in the world. It's a national shame. Shutting the internet down or shutting communications down actually doesn't change the facts. What you need is counter speech. What you need is on ground improvement in policing and law enforcement ability in actually sending people to jail if they commit crimes, but also using the power of communication that the government has with when the internet is active to try and calm things down. We don't see enough of that happening. What we see is talks about censorship. What we hear is about shutting the internet down. That hasn't solved the problem in the past,
But
and I
Nikhil,
don't see it solving the problem in the future.
in such a scenario, Nikhil, isn't the onus on us as well? And interestingly, we're having this discussion on a day when Manipur has yet again imposed an internet shutdown today for the next 5 days. But in conflict situations, in crisis situations like these, you said the government is not using the internet much to spread as much genuine information and guidelines in such situations. But the onus also lies on us, doesn't it? If we are
Well,
getting
it
some sort of information, we're not checking whether it's misinformation, it's fake news. We're just blindly following it and spreading it and sharing it across WhatsApp and Instagram and Twitter.
and that's where you need official sources to be more agile. The other thing is that hiding information, or I mean, like I said, shutting the internet down doesn't ever solve the problem. Even shutting down specific apps doesn't solve the problem. What you need to do to solve the problem is actually more communication, better communication, be heard, and have facts out so that people can verify them. People like us actually go and check official sources and try and correct the record when disinformation is actually spreading. So we need to the government to be louder than it is, to be honest, in these situations.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Okay, okay. On that note, I'm going to wrap this discussion up. Nikhil Pahwa, Khushbu Jain, Napinai, and Dr. Kislay Panday, thank you very much. This hearing at the Bombay High Court will continue tomorrow. Let's see what comes out of that and whether we can, in fact, regulate and have a mechanism in place to really see that the internet is used constructively and not for destruction and damage. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us tonight and sharing your perspective. And with that, we are heading in for a short break. News and updates will continue on Mirror now. Stay tuned.